This is the first lesson about poetry. Just a little introduction. Don't freak out. Poetry doesn't have to be miserable. In this lesson, we're going to start defining different forms of poetry, specifically rhyming and free verse poetry. But before we do that, let's just kind of talk about what makes a poem. What is it in your mind that makes a poem? If we were to do a little brainstorm, what are the things that come to mind when you think about poetry? Maybe from past lessons or just things you've read. Poetry, does it have to have stanzas? A stanza is kind of like a paragraph, but in poetry you call it a stanza. So yeah, it has a stanza, but how many? Is there a certain number? I don't know, not really. What about rhyme? Does poetry have to rhyme? Some poetry does rhyme, some poetry doesn't. So we can't say that's what makes a poem. A lot of poetry uses figurative language, but some doesn't, so it's an option, but it doesn't have to have figurative language. A lot of people would tell you it has to be about something, maybe nature, like a haiku, or love, or death, or something really intense. It doesn't have to be. One time I wrote a poem about the smell of a stinky paper mill in South Carolina, because that's what I was experiencing on a vacation. It could be about anything, really. So does it have to include a lot of feelings? Is this going to be like one of those lessons where we all start crying? Nah, probably not. The bottom line is poetry can be about pretty much anything. It's anything that a writer wants to help a reader experience. The one thing it really should do is create some sort of image or memory or feeling for the person who's reading it. That's what you need to put on your circle map. It needs to create some sort of experience and evoke some sort of reaction in the reader. If it does that, it's probably poetry. So it's written in stanzas, it creates an image, memory, or feeling, and it evokes a reaction from the reader, whether that's happiness or sadness or disgust or irritation or confusion. It's on purpose trying to get a reaction. The big deal about poetry is there should be no useless words. Every single word should count. Every punctuation counts. A writer doesn't do anything accidentally in poetry. This poem is called How to Eat a Poem, which metaphorically means basically how to read poetry. I just thought I would share it with you. How to Eat a Poem by Eve Merriam. Don't be polite. Bite in. Pick it up with your fingers and lick the juice that may run down your chin. It is ready and ripe now, whenever you are. You do not need a knife or fork or spoon or plate or napkin or tablecloth, for there is no core or stem or rind or pit or seed or skin to throw away. Does this poem rhyme? No. That's kind of weird, but it creates an image. If you want to interpret the poem, my interpretation of this poem is it might be a little bit messy or uncomfortable to read poetry, but it's okay. Just dig in and try. Just try. Because there's no wasted words or images in poetry. If it's meant to create a reaction, then what is your reaction to this poem? This part right here makes me think like, ugh. And if that's all you got, if you think, ugh, that's a reaction. I like it. So, let's talk real close about rhyme. Rhyme is one of those things that you know it when you hear it. It's the same ending sound. So we count rhyme scheme by the end of a line of poetry. Not within the line, but at the end of the line. Rhyme means the last syllable sounds the same. Cat, rat, bat, fat, sat. So we start with the letter A at the end of the line, and if the next line rhymes, you label it A. If the next line doesn't rhyme, you give it a new letter. And if that rhymes, you give it the same letter. So this could go on forever. Maybe it's A, B, A, B. Maybe it's A, B, C, A, B, C. There's a lot of different rhyme schemes, or there may be none. But if it rhymes, you count it by the end of the line. If you have two lines that rhyme with each other, it's called a couplet. Two lines that rhyme with each other are couplets. You might have a poem that has a rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, A, B, and then at the very end it says C, C, two different sounds, and so the last part of the poem would be a couplet. Shakespeare did that a lot. It was pretty popular to end your poem with a couplet, but this is the term you need to know. Couplet means two lines that rhyme, kind of like a couple is two people. Here's an example poem of rhyme. This is called A Love Song by Raymond R. Patterson. Oh. Do I love you? I'll tell you true. Do chickens have lips? Do pythons have hips? Do penguins have arms? Do spiders have charms? Do oysters get colds? Do leopards have moles? Does a birdcage make a zoo? Do I love you? What do you think? The first thing I want you to do is mark the rhyme scheme at the end of each line. So you start with the letter A and then mark the rhyme scheme. The second thing you need to do is interpret this poem. Does the speaker actually love this person? How can you tell? This is another example of a rhyming poem. It's going to look a lot different. It looks different. It kind of looks like a paragraph, but it's really just one stanza. Deer Hunt by Judson Jerome. Because the warden is a cousin, my mountain friends hunt in summer when the deer cherish each rattler-ridden spring, and I have waited hours by a pool in fear that manhood would require that I shoot, or that the steady drip of the hill would dull my ear to a snake whispering near a log I sat upon, and listen to the yelping cheer of dogs and men resounding ridge to ridge. I flinched at every lonely rifle crack, my knuckles whitening, where I gripped the edge of age and clung like retching, sinking back, then gripping once again the monstrous gun, since I, to be a man, had taken one. What I want you to try to do with this is mark the rhyme scheme and then show your teacher. So you still start with the letter A, and it may not sound like it when you read it like this, but if you look at the end of the lines, it does have a rhyme scheme. So mark the rhyme scheme, and then look at the last two lines. What type of rhyme is this? What is the term for this type of rhyme? Sometimes poetry doesn't rhyme at all. It could be free verse poetry, which means it has no set rhyme scheme. And not only that, but it would have no set rhythm. Sometimes a poem has a rhythm, and which means it's not free verse. So free verse is just kind of wide open and anything goes. Some people think it's easier. I think to do it well, it's actually harder because without rules, you don't want to just sound like random paragraph. This is a free verse poem called Absolutes by Gustav Kaiser. Black on white, crow in snow hunched, wet lump, on brittle branch remembering warmth, remembering corn, miserable as life is, black on white. Very different. Just remember that free verse poetry has no distinct pattern. If you notice a pattern, not free verse. It's got to be something else. So, lesson 1, poetry and your reflection questions. I need you just to think and come up with an answer to these questions and be able to discuss it with your teacher. Which type of poetry do you think would be easier to create, rhyming or free verse poetry? Which do you think would be easier? Obviously say why. Justify your answer. Come up with an answer that shows you're thinking about the types of poetry. Which type of poetry do you like to read more? And just explain why. Don't say none. If you say none, you go back and try again. But which one appeals to you more? Which one, and even look at the examples that I gave you, which one do you like more? So once you've answered these reflection questions, come see your teacher, talk to her, and then move on to the next lesson.